Grimm's Fairy Tales, Part 10. The Singing, Soaring Lark. Once upon a time, a man was about to set out on a long journey. And on parting, he asked his 3 daughters what he should bring back with him for them. The eldest wished for pearls. The second wished for diamonds. But the third said, "Dear father, I should like a singing, soaring lark." The father said, "Yes, if I can get it, you shall have it," kissed all 3, and set out. Now, when the time had come for him to be on his way home again, he had brought pearls and diamonds for the 2 eldest, but he had sought everywhere in vain for a singing, soaring lark for the youngest, and he was very unhappy about it, for she was his favorite child. Then his road lay through a forest, and in the midst of it was a splendid castle, and near the castle stood a tree. But quite atop the tree he saw a singing, soaring lark. "Aha! You have come at just the right moment," he said, quite delighted, and called to his servant to climb up and catch the little creature. But as he approached the tree, a lion leapt from beneath it, shook himself, and roared till the leaves of the tree rumbled. "He who tries to steal my singing, soaring lark," he cried, "will I devour." The man said, "I did not know that the bird belonged to thee. I will make amends for the wrong I have done, and ransom to myself a large sum of money. Only spare my life." The lion said, "Nothing can save thee, unless thou wilt promise to give me for my own what first meets thee on thy return home. And if thou wilt do that, I will grant thee thy life, and thou shalt have thy bird for thy daughter, into the bargain." But the man hesitated and said, "That might be my youngest daughter. She loves me best, and always runs to meet me on my way home." The servant, however, was terrified and said, "Why should your daughter be the very first one to meet you? It might as easily be a cat or dog." So the man allowed himself to be persuaded, took the singing, soaring lark, and promised to give the lion whatsoever should first meet him on his return home. When he reached home and entered his house, the first who met him was none other than his youngest and dearest daughter, who came up running and kissed and embraced him. And when she saw that he had brought with him a singing, soaring lark, she was beside herself with joy. The father, however, could not rejoice, but began to weep and said, "My dearest child, I have brought the little bird. In return for it, I have obliged to promise thee to a savage lion. And when he has thee, he will tear thee in pieces and devour thee." And he told her all just as it happened, and begged her not to go there, come what might. But she consoled him and said, "Dearest father, indeed your promise must be fulfilled. I will go thither and soften the lion, so that I may return to thee safely." Next morning she had the road pointed out to her, took leave, and went fearlessly into the forest. The lion, however, was an enchanted prince, and was by day a lion, and all his people were lions with him. But in the night they resumed their natural shapes. And on her arrival she was kindly received and led into the castle. When night came, the lion turned into a handsome man, and their wedding was celebrated with great magnificence. They lived happily together, remained awake at night, and slept in the daytime. One day he came and said, "Tomorrow there is a feast in thy father's house, because your eldest sister is to be married, and if thou art inclined to go there, my lions shall conduct thee." She said, "Yes, I should very much like to see my father again," and went thither, accompanied by the lions. And there was great joy when she arrived, for they had all believed that she had been torn to pieces by the lion, and had long ceased to live. But she told them what a handsome husband she had, and how well off she was, and remained with them while the wedding feast lasted, and then went back again to the forest. When the second daughter was about to be married, and she was again invited to the wedding, she said to the lion, "This time I will not be alone. Thou must come with me." The lion, however, said that it was too dangerous for him, for if, when there was a ray burning from a candle fell on him, he would be changed into a dove, and for 7 years would have to fly about with the doves. She ran, but do come with me. I will take great care of thee, and guard thee from all the light." I think that's too much of a risk. Even for the, in a world of, magical enchantments and shit, people are taking this shit way too lightly. So they went away together, and took them their little child as well. She had a chamber built there so strong and thick that no ray could pierce through it. In this he was to shut himself up when the candles were lit for the wedding feast. But the door was made of greenwood, which warped and fell, left a little crack, which no one noticed. The wedding was celebrated with magnificence, but when the procession with all its candles and torches came back from the church, and passed by this apartment, a ray about the breadth of a hair fell on the king's son. And when the ray touched him, he was transformed in an instant. And when she came in and looked for him, she did not see him, but a white dove sitting there. The dove said to her, "For 7 years must I fly about the world, but at every 7th step you take, I will let fall a drop of red blood and a white feather, and these will show thee the way. If thou followest the trace, thou canst release me." Thereupon the dove flew out of the door. Then she followed him, and at every 7th step a red drop of blood and a little white feather fell down, and showed her the way. So she went continually farther and further into the wide world, never looking about her or resting, and for 7 years were almost past. Then she rejoiced and thought that they would soon be delivered. And yet they were so far from it. Once, when they were moving onwards, no little feather and no drop of blood fell. And when she raised her eyes, the dove had disappeared. And she thought to herself, "In this no man can help thee." She climbed up to the sun, and said to him, "Thou shinest into every crevice, and over every peak. Hast thou not seen a white dove flying?" "No," said the sun, "I have seen none. But I present thee with a casket. Open it when thou art in sorest need." Then she thanked the sun, and went on until evening, and came until the moon appeared. She then asked her, "Thou shinest the whole night through, and on every field and forest. Hast thou not seen a white dove flying?" "No," said the moon, "I have seen no dove. But here I give thee an egg. Break it when thou art in great need." She thanked the moon, and went on until the night came up, and blew on her, and she said to it, "Thou blowest over every tree, and under every leaf. Hast thou not seen a white dove flying?" "No," said the night wind, "I have seen none. But I will ask thee 3 other winds. Perhaps they have seen it." The east and the west wind came, and had seen nothing, but the south wind said, "I have seen the white dove. It has flown to the Red Sea, where it has become a lion again. For the 7 years are over, and the lion is there fighting with a dragon. The dragon, however, is an enchanted princess." That night wind then said to her, "I would advise thee go to the Red Sea on the red bank. There are some tall reeds, count them, and break off the 11th, and strike the dragon with it. Then the lion will be able to subdue it, and both then will regain their human form. After that look around, and thou wilt see the griffin, which is by the Red Sea. Swing thyself with thy beloved on his back, and the bird will carry thee over the sea to your home. Here is a nut for thee. When thou art above the center of the sea, let the nut fall. It will immediately shoot up, and a tall nut tree will grow out of the water, on which the griffin may rest. For if he cannot rest, he will not be strong enough to carry you across. And if thou forgettest to throw down the nut, he will let you fall into the sea." Then she went thither, and found everything as the night wind had said. She counted the reeds by the sea and cut off the 11th, struck the dragon therewith, whereupon the lion overcame it, and immediately both of them regained their human shapes. But when the princess, who had before been a dragon, was delivered from enchantment, she took the youth by arm, seated herself on the griffin, and carried him off with her. There stood the poor maiden, who had wandered so far and was again forsaken. She sat down and cried, but at last she took courage and said, "Still I will go as far as the wind blows, and as long as the cock crows, until I find him." And she went forth, by long, long roads, until at last she came to the castle, where both of them were living together. There she heard that soon a feast would be held, in which they would celebrate their wedding. But she said, "God still helps me," and opened the casket that the sun had given her. A dress lay there, as brilliant as the sun itself. So she took it out, trying not to comment on so many things that are wrong with the story, but okay. And everyone, even the bride herself, looked at her with astonishment. The dress pleased the bride so well that she thought it might do for her wedding dress, and asked if it was for sale. "Not for money or land," answered he, "but for flesh and blood." The bride asked her what she meant by that, and so she said, "Let me sleep a night in the chamber where the bridegroom sleeps." The bride would not, yet wanted very much to have the dress. At last she consented, but the page was to give the prince a sleeping draught. When it was night, therefore, the youth was already asleep. She was led into the chamber. She seated herself on the bed and said, "I have followed after thee for 7 years. I have been to the sun and the moon, and the 4 winds, and have inquired for thee, and help thee against the dragon. Wilt thou then quite forget me?" But the prince slept so soundly that it only seemed to him as if the wind were whistling outside in the fir trees. When therefore day broke, she was let out again, and had to give up the golden dress, and as that had been no avail, she was sad. She went into the meadow and sat there and wept. While she was sitting there, she thought of the egg which the moon had given her. She opened it, and out came a clucking hen with 12 chickens of all of gold, and they ran about chirping, and crept again under the old hen's wing. Nothing more beautiful was ever seen in the world. Then she arose and drove them through the meadow before her, until the bride looked out of the window. And the little chickens pleased her so much that she immediately came down and asked if they were for sale, not for money or for land, but for flesh and blood. "Let me sleep another night in the chamber wherein the bridegroom sleeps." The bride said yes, intending to cheat her, as on the former evening. But when the prince went to bed, he asked the page what the murmuring and rushing of the night had been, and the page told all, and he had been forced to give him a sleeping draught, because the poor girl had slept secretly in the chamber, and that he was to give him another that night. And the prince said, "Pour out the draught by the bedside." And at night she was let in again, and when she began to relate how ill all had fared with her, she immediately recognized his beloved as his wife by her voice, sprang up and cried, "Now I really am released. I have been as it were in a dream, for the strange princess has bewitched me, so that I have been compelled to forget thee. But God has delivered me from the spell at the right time." Then they both left the castle in the night, for they feared the father of the princess, who was a sorcerer. And they seated themselves on the griffin, which bore them across the sea, and when they were at the midst of it, she let the nut fall. Immediately a tall nut tree grew, and whereupon the bird rested, and then carried them home, where they found their child, who had grown tall and beautiful. And they lived thenceforth happily until their death. Clever Hans. The mother of Hans said, "Whither away, Hans?" Hans answered, "To Grethel." "Behave well, Hans." "Oh, I'll behave well. Goodbye, mother. Goodbye, Hans." Hans came to Grethel. "Good day, Grethel." "Good day, Hans. What dost thou bring that is good?" "I bring nothing. I want to have something given me." Grethel presents Hans with a needle. Hans says, "Goodbye, Grethel." "Goodbye, Hans." Hans takes the needle, sticks it into a hay cart, and follows the cart home. "Good evening, mother." "Good evening, Hans. Where hast thou been?" "With Grethel." "What didst thou take her?" "Took nothing. Had something given me." "What did Grethel give thee?" "Gave me a needle." "Where is the needle, Hans?" "Stuck in the hay cart." "That was ill done, Hans. Thou shouldst have stuck the needle in thy sleeve." "Never mind. I'll do better next time." "Whither away, Hans?" "To Grethel's mother." "Behave well, Hans." "Oh, I'll behave well. Goodbye, mother." "Goodbye, Hans." Hans came to Grethel. "Good day, Grethel." "Good day, Hans. What dost thou bring that is good?" "I bring nothing. I want to have something given me." Grethel presents Hans with a knife. "Goodbye, Grethel." "Goodbye, Hans." Hans takes the knife, sticks it in his sleeve, and goes home. "Good evening, mother." "Good evening, Hans." Where hast thou been? With Grethel. What didst thou take her? Took her nothing, she gave me something. What did Grethel give thee? Gave me a knife. Where is the knife, Hans? Stuck in my sleeve. That's ill done, Hans. Thou shouldst have put the knife in thy pocket. Never mind, we'll do better next time. Whither away, Hans? To Grethel, mother. Behave well, Hans. Oh, I'll behave well. Goodbye, mother. Goodbye, Hans. Hans comes to Grethel. Good day, Grethel. Good day, Hans. What good thing dost thou bring? I bring nothing. I want something given me. Grethel presents Hans with a young goat. Goodbye, Grethel. Goodbye, Hans. Hans takes the goat, ties its legs, and puts it in his pocket. It's a big-ass pocket. When he gets to home, it is suffocate. What the fuck?! Hans takes the goat, ties its legs, and puts it in his pocket. When he gets home, it is suffocated. I guess we're eating the goat? How did it suffocate? In the... Good evening, mother. Good evening, Hans. Where hast thou been? With Grethel. What didst thou take her? Took nothing. She gave me something. What did Grethel give thee? She gave me a goat. Where is the goat, Hans? Put it in my pocket. That was ill done, Hans. Thou shouldst have put the rope around the goat's neck. Never mind, we'll do better next time. Whither away, Hans? To Grethel, mother. Behave well, Hans. Oh, I'll behave well. Goodbye, mother. Goodbye, Hans. Hans comes to Grethel. Good day, Grethel. Good day, Hans. What good dost thou bring? Good thing dost thou bring? I bring nothing. I want something given me. Grethel presents Hans with a piece of bacon. Goodbye, Grethel. Goodbye, Hans. Hans takes the bacon and ties it to a rope and drags it away behind him. The dogs come and devour the bacon. When he gets home, he has the rope in his hand, and there is no longer anything to it. Good evening, mother. Good evening, Hans. Where hast thou been? With Grethel. What didst thou take her? I took her nothing. She gave me something. What did Grethel give thee? Gave me a bit of bacon. Where is the bacon, Hans? I tied it to a rope and brought it home. Dogs took it. That was ill done, Hans. Thou shouldst have carried the bacon on thy head. Really? Never mind. We'll do better next time. Whither away, Hans? To Grethel, mother. Behave well, Hans. I'll behave well. Goodbye, mother. Goodbye, Hans. Hans comes to Grethel. Good day, Grethel. Good day, Hans. What good thing dost thou bring? I bring nothing, but would have something given. Grethel presents Hans with a calf. Goodbye, Grethel. Goodbye, Hans. Hans takes the calf and puts it on his head, and the calf kicks his face. Good evening, mother. Good evening, Hans. Where hast thou been? With Grethel. What didst thou take her? I took nothing, but had something given me. What did Grethel give thee? A calf. Where hast thou the calf? Hans, I set it on my head and kicked my face. That was ill done. Hans, thou should have led the calf and put it in the stall. Never mind, we'll do better next time. Whither away, Hans? To Grethel, mother. Behave well, Hans. I'll behave well. Goodbye, mother. Goodbye, Hans. Hans comes to Grethel. Goodbye, Grethel. Good day, Grethel. Good day, Hans. What good thing hast thou to bring? I bring nothing, but would have something given. Grethel says to Hans, I will go with thee. Hans ties her to a rope and leads her to the rack and binds her fast. Then Hans goes to mother. What? Good evening, mother. Good evening, Hans. Where hast thou been? With Grethel. What didst thou take her? I took her nothing. What did Grethel give thee? She gave me nothing. She came with me. Where hast thou left Grethel? I led her by the rope and tied her to the rack, and scattered some grass for her. That was ill done, Hans. Thou shouldst have cast friendly eyes on her. Is that a euphemism for I should have fucked her? Also, is she dead? Is she dead? What is the moral? There's a couple sentences left. Maybe the moral of the story is here. Never mind, we'll do better. Hans went into the stable, What? What? This is not a moral! Hans went into the stable, cut out all of the calves and sheep's eyes, and threw them in Grethel's face. Then Grethel became angry tore herself loose, and ran away, and never became the bride of Hans. What the fuck? The 7 Ravens. There was once a man who had 7 sons, and still he had no daughter, however much he wished for one. At length his wife again gave him hope of a child, and when it came into the world it was a girl. The joy was great, but the child was sickly and small, and had to be privately baptized on account of its weakness. The father sent one of the boys in haste to the spring to fetch water for the baptism. The other 6 went with him, and as each of them wanted to be first to fill it, the jug fell into the well. There they stood and did not know what to do, and none of them dared to go home. As they still did not return, the father grew impatient and said, "They have certainly forgotten it for some game, the wicked boys." He became afraid that the girl would have to die without being Okay, so you're implying that you're expecting the child to die no matter what, and you're like, oh, I have to at least get it baptized first so it goes to heaven before it dies. Why are none of these stories happy? Like, even the ones that say happily live after, people only live happily ever after, like, everyone else is dead. It's like, oh, Cinderella lived happily, like Snow White, or, oh, they lived happily ever after. Like, Cinderella lives happily ever after. After everyone else has their eyes gouged out, and they're like, and then it's like, oh, Snow White lived happily ever after. You know, after somebody was forced to wear. Granted, the people were assholes, but still. It's like, oh, yeah, everyone lived happily ever after. After everyone else was miserable and died. Like, literally the last story ended with someone gouging the eyeballs out of living animals and throwing them to some woman they have tied in a stall outside by a barn in their face. What the fuck? It's like the Saw movies. But, you know, before electricity. And none of them do. Okay, but, What? Why does every sentence get worse? He became afraid because the girl would have to die without becoming baptized, and in his anger cried, "I wish the boys were all turned into ravens." Hardly was this word spoken before he heard a whirring of wings over his head in the air and looked up and saw 7 coal-black ravens flying. The parents could not recall the curse, however, said that they were at the loss of their 7 sons. They still, to some extent, comforted themselves with their dear little daughter, who soon grew strong, and every day became more beautiful. For a long time, she did not know that she had brothers, had brothers, for her parents were careful not to mention them before her. But for one day, she accidentally heard some people saying to herself that the girl was certainly beautiful, but in reality she was to blame for the misfortune which had befallen her 7 brothers. Then she was much troubled, and went to her father and mother and asked if this was true, that she had brothers, and what had become of them. The parents now dared keep the secret no longer, but had befallen... Did I miss a page? But said what had befallen her brothers, as was the will of heaven, and that her birth had only been the innocent cause. But the maiden took it to heart daily, and thought that she must deliver her brothers. She had no rest or peace until she set out secretly, and went forth into the wide world to trace out her brothers and set them free, let it cost what it might. She took nothing with her but a little ring belonging to her parents as a keepsake, a loaf of bread against hunger, a little pitcher of water against thirst, and a little chair as a provision against weariness. But you're literally carrying the chair. And now she went continually onwards, far, far to the end of the merry world. Then she came to the sun, and it was too hot and terrible, and it devoured little... The sun in the sky devours little children. Okay? Hastily she ran away, and ran to the moon. But it was far too cold, and awful, and malicious, and when it saw the child, it said, I smell the flesh of men." On this she ran swiftly away. What kind of drugs was everyone on? And came to the stars, which were kind and good to her, and each of them sat in its own particular little chair. But the morning star arose, and gave her a drumstick of a chicken, and said, If thou hast not the drumstick, thou canst not open the glass mountain, and in the glass mountain are thy brothers. The maiden took the drumstick, wrapped in carefully a cloth, and went onwards again until she came to the glass mountain. The door was shut, and she thought she would take out the drumstick, but when she undid the cloth, it was empty. She had lost the good star's present. What was she to do now? She wished to rescue her brothers, but had no key to the glass mountain. The good sister took a knife and cut one of her little fingers and put it in the... She cut off one of her fingers and used it as a key. Okay. The good sister took a knife and cut off one of her little fingers and put it in the door and succeeded in opening. When she had gone inside, a little dwarf came to meet her and said, "My child, what are you looking for?" "I am looking for my brothers, the 7 ravens." She replied. The dwarf said, "The Lord Ravens are not at home, but if you will wait here until they come, step in." Thereupon the little dwarf carried the ravens' dinner in, and on 7 little plates and 7 little glasses, the little sister ate a morsel from each plate, and from each little glass took a sip. But in the last glass she dropped the ring, which she had brought away with her. Suddenly she heard the whirrings of wings and the rushing through the air, and then the little dwarf said, "Now the Lord Ravens are flying home." Then they came and wanted to eat and drink, and looked at their plates and glasses. They said one after another, "Who has eaten something from my plate? Who has drunk something of my little glass?" It was a human mouth. And when the 7th came to the bottom of the glass, the ring rolled against his mouth. And then he looked at it and saw that it was a ring belonging to his father and mother, and said, "God grant that our sister might be here, and then we shall be free." When the maiden, who was standing behind the door watching, heard the wish, she came forth. And on this all the ravens were restored to the human form skin. And they embraced and kissed each other, and went joyfully home. The boy who did not fear. A certain father had 2 sons, the elder of whom was smart and sensible and could do anything, but the youngest was stupid and could neither learn nor understand anything. And when the people saw him, they said, "There's a fellow who will give his father some trouble." When anything had to be done, it was always the elder who was forced to do it. But if his father bade him fetch anything when it was late or in the night time, and the way led through the churchyard or any other dismal place, he answered, "Oh no, father, I will not go there. It makes me shudder," for he was afraid. Or when others told stories by the fire at night that made his flesh creep, he sometimes said, "Oh, it makes me shudder." The youngest sat in the corner and listened to the rest of them, and could not imagine what his older brother meant. He is always saying, "It makes me shudder. It makes me shudder. It does not make me shudder," thought he. "That too must be an art, of which I understand nothing." Now it came to pass that his father said to the younger son, "One day hearken to me, thou fellow in the corner there. Thou art growing tall and strong, and thou too must learn something by which thou canst earn thy living. Look how thy brother works, but thou dost not even earn thy salt." "Well, father," he replied, "I am quite willing to learn something indeed, if it could be but managed. I should like to learn how to shudder. I don't understand that at all yet." The elder brother smiled when he heard that, and thought to himself, "Good God, what a blockhead that brother of mine is. He will never be good for anything as long as he lives. He who wants to be a sickle must bend himself sometimes." The father sighed and answered, "Thou shalt soon learn what it is to shudder, but thou wilt not earn thy bread by that." Soon after, this sexton came to his house on a visit, and the father bewailed his trouble, and told him how the younger son was so backward in every respect that he knew nothing and learnt nothing. "Just think," said he, "when I asked him how he was going to earn his bread, he actually wanted to learn to shudder." "If that be all," replied the sexton, "he can learn that with me. Send him to me, and I will soon polish him." It sounds disturbing. The father was glad to do it, for he thought, "It will train the boy a little." The sexton, therefore, took him into his house, and he had to ring the bell. After a day or two, the sexton awoke him at midnight, and bade him arise and go up to the church tower and ring the bell. "Thou shalt soon learn what shuddering is," thought he, and secretly went there before him. And when the boy was at the top of the tower, turned round, and was just going to take hold of the bell rope, he saw a white figure standing on the stairs opposite the sounding hole. "Who is there?" cried he, but the figure made no reply, and did not move or stir. "Give an answer," cried the boy, "or take thyself off. Thou hast no business here at night." The sexton, however, remained standing motionless, that the boy might think he was a ghost. The boy cried a second time, "What do you want here? Speak if thou art an honest fellow, or I'll throw thee down the steps." The sexton thought, "He can't intend to be as bad as his words," uttered no sound, and stood as if he were made of stone. Then the boy called him a third time, and as that was also to no purpose, the boy ran against the ghost, and pushed the ghost down the stairs, so that it fell down 10 steps and remained laying there in a corner. Thereupon he rang the bell, went home without saying a word, and went to bed and fell asleep. The sexton's wife waited a long time for her husband, but he did not come back. At length she became easy, and wakened the boy and asked, "Dost thou not know where my husband is? He climbed up the tower before thou didst." "No, I don't know," replied the boy, "but someone was standing by the sounding hole on the other side of the steps, and he would neither give an answer nor go away. I took him for a scoundrel, and threw him down the stairs. Just go there, and you will see it for who it was he. See if it was he. I should be sorry if it were." The woman ran away and found her husband, who was lying moaning in the corner and had broken his leg. She carried him down, and then with loud screams she hastened to the boy's father. "Your boy," cried he, "has been the cause of great misfortune. He has thrown my husband down the steps and made him break his leg. Take the good-for-nothing fellow away from our house." The father was terrified and ran thither and scolded the boy. "What wicked tricks are these?" said he. "The devil must have put this into thy head." "Father," he replied, "do listen to me. I am quite innocent. He was standing there by the night, like one intending to do some evil. I did not know who it was, and I entreated him 3 times to either speak or go away." "Ah," said the father, "I have nothing but unhappiness with you. Go out of my sight. I will see thee no more." "Yes, father, right willingly. Wait only until it is day. Then will I go forth and learn how to shudder. And then I shall, at any rate, understand one art which will support me." "Learn thou wilt," spake the father. "It is all the same to me. Here are 50 thalers for thee. Take these and go to the wide world, and tell no one from whence thou comest, and who is thy father, for I have reason to be ashamed of thee." "Yes, father, it shall be as you will. If you desire nothing more than that, I can easily keep it in mind." When day dawned, therefore, the boy put his 50 thalers into his pocket and went forth on the great highway, continually said to himself, "If I could but shudder, if I could but shudder." Then a man approached, heard this conversation which the youth was holding with himself, and when they had walked a little further, where they could see the gallows, the man said, "Look, there is the tree where 7 men have married the rope-maker's daughter, and are now learning how to fly. Sit down below it and wait till night comes, and you will soon learn how to shudder." "If that is all that is wanted," answered the youth, "it is easily done. But if I learn how to shudder as fast as that, thou shalt have my 50 thalers. Just come back to me early in the morning." Then the youth went to the gallows and sat below it, and waited till evening came. And as he was cold, he lighted himself a fire. But at midnight the wind blew so sharply that in spite of the fire he could not get warm. And as the wind knocked the hanged men against each other, and they moved backwards and forward, he thought to himself, "Thou shiverest below the fire, but how those up above must freeze and suffer. They're dead, they can't feel that it's cold." And as he felt pity for the dead corpses that are in the air, he raised the ladder and climbed up and unbound them one after another and brought down all 7 carcasses. He then stirred the fire, blew it, and set them all round the fire to warm themselves. But they sat there and did not stir, and the fire... Did you just light all these dead corpses on fire? That's redundant. So he said, "Take care, or I will hang you up again." What? I feel like this should be like a Meat Canyon sketch. You guys ever watch Meat Canyon on YouTube? The dead men, however, did not hear, but were quite silent, and let their rags go on burning. On this he grew very angry and said, "If you will not take care, I cannot help you, and I will not be burnt with you." And he hung them back up again, each in his turn. Then he sat down by the fire and fell asleep. And the next morning the man came and wanted to have his 50 thalers, and said, "Well, dost thou know how to shudder?" "No," answered he. "How was I to get to know? Those fellows up there did not open their mouths, and were so stupid that they let their few old rags which they had on their bodies get burnt." Then the man saw that he would not get the 50 thalers a day, and went on saying, "One of this kind has never come my way." At this point, it's like, I feel like it's not so much the person doesn't understand. It's not. I mean, this seems less of an issue of intelligence and more of an issue of sociopathy. Like, the person's straight up a psychopath. Like, does this story end with like him killing everyone in an entire city? The youth likewise went his way, and once more began to mutter to himself, "Ah, If I could but shudder. Ah, if I could but shudder. A wagoner, who was standing behind him, had heard it and asked, Who are you? I don't know, answered the youth. Then the wagoner asked, From whence thou comest? I know not. Who is thy father? That I may not tell thee. What is it that thou art muttering about between thy teeth? Ah, replied the youth, I do so wish I could shudder, but no one can teach me how to do it. Give up thy foolish chatter, called the wagoner. Come with me, and I will see about a place for thee. The youth went with the wagoner, and in the evening arrived at an inn, where they wished to pass the night. Then in the entrance to the room, the youth again said quietly, If I could but shudder, if I could but shudder. The host who heard this laughed and said, If that is your desire, there ought to be good opportunity for you here. Ah, be silent, said the hostess. So many inquisitive persons have already lost their lives. It would be pity and a shame if such beautiful eyes as these should never... Oh! Does the hostess think... Does the hostess want to marry the one guy? I don't know anyone's names. Has anyone given a name? Just gotta start giving people anime name, protagonist names. Ah, be silent, said the Beautiful eyes such as these should never see daylight again. But the youth said, However difficult it may be, I will learn it, and for this purpose indeed I journey forth. He let the host have no rest until the latter told him. And not far from thence stood a haunted castle, where one could very easily learn what shuddering was, if he would but watch in it for 3 nights. The king had promised that he who adventured should have his daughter to wife, and she was the most beautiful maiden that sun shone on. I feel like the hostess was saying, Hey, you're going to this place to meet the beautiful maiden. Like, I'm a beautiful maiden. The king had promised a wife, and she was the most beautiful maiden the sun shone on. The great treasures likewise lay in the castle, which were guarded by evil spirits, and these treasures would then be freed, and would make a poor man rich enough. Already many men had gone to the castle, but yet none had come out again. Then the youth went next morning to the king and said, if he were allowed to watch 3 nights at the haunted castle. The king looked at him, and the youth pleased said, Thou mayest ask for 3 things take with thee in the castle with thee, but they must be things without life. Then he answered, Then I ask for a fire, a turning lathe, and a cutting board with a knife. The king had these things carried to the castle for him during the day. When the night was drawing near, the youth went up and made himself a bright fire in one of the rooms, placed the cutting board and knife beside it, and seated himself by the turning lathe. Ah, if I could but shudder, said he, but I shall not learn it here either. Towards midnight he was about to poke his fire. As he was blowing it out, something cried suddenly from the corner, Ah! Meow! How cold we are! You simpletons, cried he, what are you crying about? If you are cold, come and take a seat by the fire and warm yourselves. And when he had said that, the 2 great black cats came with a tremendous leap, and sat down each beside him, and looked savagely at him with their fiery eyes. And after a short time, when they had warmed themselves, they said, Comrade, shall we have at a game of cards? Why not, he replied, but just show me your paws. Then they stretched out their claws, and, Oh, said he, what long nails you have. Wait, I must first cut them for you. Thereupon he seized them by the throats, and put them on the cutting board, and screwed their feet fast. I have locked your fingers, said he, and my fancy for card-playing has gone. And he struck them dead and threw them out into the river. But when he had made away with these 2, and was about to sit down again by the fire, out from every hole, every corner, black cats and black dogs and red-hot chains, and what is this, Dungeons and Dragons? And more of them came until he could no longer stir. And they yelled horribly and got on his fire, pulled it to pieces, and tried to put it out. He watched them for a while quietly, but at last, when they were going too far, he seized his cutting knife and cried, Away with ye, vermin, and began to cut them down. Part of them ran away, and the others he killed and threw out into the fish pond. When he came back, he fanned the embers of his fire again, and warmed himself. And as he thus sat, his eyes would keep open no longer, and he felt a desire to sleep. Then he looked round and saw a great bed in the corner. That is the very thing for me, he said, and got into it. And when he was just about to shut his eyes, however, the bed began to move of its own accord, and went over the whole of the castle. That's right, said he, but go faster. Then the bed rolled on, as if 6 horse harnessed to it, up and down, over thresholds and steps, but suddenly hop, it turned up over upside down, and lay him on the mountain. But he threw quilts and pillows up in the air, and got out and said, Now, anyone who likes may drive. and lay down by his fire, and slept till it was day. In the morning the king came, and when he saw him laying there on the ground, he thought the evil spirits had killed him, and he was dead. Then said he, After all, it is a pity. He is a handsome man. Why is everyone keeper? Like, it's nice to get the compliment, but it's kind of odd. Like, oh, he's dead, but he was pretty. But what? The youth heard it, got up, and said, It has not come to that yet. Then the king was astonished, but very glad, and asked how he had fared. Very well indeed. One night is past. The 2 others will get over likewise. Then he went to the innkeeper, who opened his eyes very wide and said, I had never expected to see thee alive again. Hast thou learned how to shudder yet? No, said he. It's all in vain. If someone would but tell me. The second night he went again, up into the old castle, sat down by the fire, and once more began his old song. If I could but shudder. When midnight came, an uproar and noise tumbling about was heard. At first it was low, but it grew louder and louder. Then it was quiet for a while, and at length, in a loud scream, half a man came down the chimney, and fell before him. Hollo! He cried. Another half belongs to this. This is too little. Then the uproar began again, and there was a roaring and a howling. The other half fell down likewise. Wait, said he. I will just blow up the fire a little for thee. When he had done that, and looked round again, the 2 pieces were joined together, and a frightful man was sitting in his place. That is no part of our bargain, said the youth. That bench is mine. The man wanted to push him away. The youth, however, would not allow that, but thrust through him with all his might, and seated himself again in his own place. Then still more men fall down. One after the other, they brought 9 dead men's legs and 2 skulls, and set them up and played 9 pins with it. So we're just like turning this into a bowling alley? The youth also wanted to play and said, Hark you, can I join you? Yes, if thou hast any money. Money enough, replied he, but your balls are not quite round. Then he took the skulls, and put them in lath, and turned them until they were round. Now they will roll better, said he. Hurry. And now it goes merrily. He played with them and lost some of his money, but when it struck 12, everything vanished from sight. He lay down quietly and fell asleep. Next morning the king came to inquire, How has it fared with you this time? I have been playing at 9 pence, he answered, and have lost a couple of farthings. Hast thou not shuddered then? What? Said he. I have made merry. If I did but know what it was to shudder. The 3rd night he sat down on his bench, and said quite sadly, If I could but shudder. When it grew late, 6 tall men came in and brought a coffin, and then said, Ha, that is certainly my little cousin who died a few days ago. And he beckoned with his finger and cried, Come, little cousin, come. They placed the coffin on the ground, but he went to it and took the lid off, and a dead man lay therein. He felt his face, and it was cold as ice. Stop, said he, I will warm thee a little. He went to the fire, and warmed his hand, and laid on it, and the dead man's face, but he remained cold. But then he took him out, and sat him down by the fire, and laid him on his breast, and rubbed his arms, and his blood might circulate again. As this also did no good, he thought to himself, When 2 people lie in bed together, they warm each other, and carried to the bed, and covered him over. After a short time the dead man became warm too, and began to move. Then said the youth, See, little cousin, have I not warmed thee? The dead man, however, got up and cried, Now will I strangle thee. What? Said he, Is that the way thou thinkest me? Thou shalt at once go into thy coffin again. And he took him up and threw him into it, and shut the lid. Then the 6 men came and carried him away again. I cannot manage to shudder, said he. I shall never learn it from here as long as I live. Then a man entered who was taller than the others, and looked terrible. He was old, however, and had a long beard, white beard. Thou wretch, cried he, thou shalt soon learn what it is to shudder, for thou shalt die. Not so fast, replied the youth. If I am to die, I shall have the say in it. I will soon seize thee, said the fiend. Softly, softly, do not talk so big. I am as strong as thou art, and perhaps even strong. We shall see, said the old man. If thou art stronger, I will let thee go. Come, we will try. Then he led him a dark passage to a smith's forge, took the axe, and with one blow struck an anvil into the ground. I can do better that, said the youth, and went to the other anvil, and the old man placed himself near, and wanted to look on, and his white beard hung down. Then the youth seized the axe, split the anvil with one blow, and struck the old man's beard in with it. Now I have thee, says the youth. Now it is thou who will have to die. Then he seized an iron bar, and beat the old man till he moaned. and entreated him to stop, and said he would give him great riches. The youth drew out the axe and let him go. The old man led him back to the castle, and the seller showed him 3 chests full of gold. Of these, said he, 1 part is for the poor, the other is for the king, the third is thine. In the meantime, it struck 12, and the spirit disappeared, and the youth therefore was left in darkness. I shall be able to find my way out, said he. He felt about, found the way into the room, and slept here by his fire. Next morning the king came and said, Now thou must have learned what shuddering is. No, he answered. What can it be? My dead cousin was here, and a bearded man came and showed me a great deal of money down below. But no one told me what it was to shudder. Then, said the king, thou hast delivered the castle, and shalt marry my daughter. That is all very well, said he, but still I do not know what it is to shudder. Then the gold was brought up to the wedding and celebrated. But however so much the young king loved his wife, and however so happy he was, he still said, If I could but shudder, if I could but shudder. And at last she was angry at this. Her waiting maid said, I will find a cure for him. He shall soon learn what it is to shudder. She went out to the stream, which flowed through the garden, and a whole bucket full of gudgeons brought to her. At night, when the young king was sleeping, his wife was to draw the clothes off him and empty the bucket of cold water with the gudgeons. What is a gudgeon? And over him. So that the little fishes, okay, so it's a type of fish, so little fishes would sprawl about him. When this was done, he woke up and cried, Oh, what makes me shudder so? What makes me shudder so, dear wife? Ah, now I know what it is to shudder. Okay. I would certainly say in this situation, like, man or woman, regardless of any, if your partner is like obsessed over something like that, there's obviously got to be some sort of psychological reason. It's got to be something that, maybe you should just talk about. Like, obviously this is just him feeling like, okay, he's being judged as inferior to his brother and hated by his father. So it's like, okay, the whole obsession with the shuddering thing is just wanting approval and respect and just not being over negative things that were said to you in great repetition. Clever Elise. There was once a man who had a daughter who was called Clever Elise, and when she had grown up, her father said, Will we get her married? Yes, said the mother, if only one would come and would have her. At length a man came from a distance, and wooed her, who was called Hans. A lot of people are named Hans, but he stipulated that Clever Elise should be really wise. Oh, said the father, she's sharp enough. And the mother said, Oh, she can see the wind coming up the street, and hear the flies coughing. Well, said Hans, if she is not really wise, I won't have her. Then they were sitting at dinner and had eaten, and the mother said, Elise, go into the cellar and fetch some beer. Then Clever Elise took the pitcher from the wall, and went into the cellar and tapped the lid briskly as she went, so that the time might not appear long. When she was below, she fetched herself a long chair, and set it before the barrel so that she had no need to stoop. She did not hurt her back, or to do herself any unexpected injury. Then she placed the can before her, and turned the tap, and while the beer was running she would not let her eyes be idle, but looked up at the wall, and after much peering here and there, saw a pickaxe exactly above her, which the masons had accidentally left there. Okay. Then Clever Elise began to weep and said, If I get Hans, and we have a child, and he grows big, and we send him to the cellar here to draw beer, then the pickaxe will fall on his head and he'll kill him. That's some overthinking there. Then she sat and wept and screamed with all the strength of her body over the misfortune that lay before her. Those upstairs waited for the drink, but Clever Elise still did not come. Then the woman said to the servant, Just go down and cellar and see where Elise is. The maid went and found Elise sitting in front of the barrel, screaming loudly. Elise, why weepest thou? Asked the maid. Ah, she answered, have I not reason to weep? If I get Hans, and we have a child, and he grows big, and has to draw beer here, the pickaxe perhaps will fall on his head and kill him. Then said the maid, What a clever Elise we have, and sat down beside her and began to loudly weep over the misfortune. After a while, as the maid did not come back, those upstairs were thirsty for the beer. And the man said to the boy, "Just go down the cellar and see where Elise is and the girl are." The boy went down and saw that clever Elise and the girl were both weeping. And then he asked, "Why are ye weeping?" "Ah," said Elise, "have I not reason to weep? If I get Hans, and we have a child, and he grows big and has to draw beer here, the pickaxe will fall on his head and kill him." Then said the boy, "What a clever Elise we have," and sat down by her and likewise began to howl loudly. How fucking thick is the floor between these? How could... Whatever. Upstairs they waited for so long, the boy, but he still not returned. The man said to the woman, "Just go down and cellar and see where Elise is." The woman went down and found all three in the midst of lamentation, inquired of what was the cause. Then Elise told her also that her future child was to be killed by the pickaxe, when it grows big and had to draw beer. And the pickaxe fell down. Then said the mother likewise, "What a clever Elise we have." Sat down and wept with him. The man upstairs waited a short while, but as his wife did not come back, and his thirst grew ever greater, he said, "I must go down the cellar myself and see where Elise is." But when we got into the cellar, and they were all sitting together crying, and he heard the reason, and that Elise's child was the cause, and that Elise might perhaps bring one to the world one day, and that it might be killed by the pickaxe if it should happen to be sitting beneath it, drawing beer, just at the very time it fell down, he cried, "Oh, what a clever Elise," and sat down and likewise wept with them. The bridegroom, a man sitting by himself, where like 5 people are just sitting downstairs crying and screaming. Anyway, there was no that would come back to the thought. They must be waiting for me below. I too must go there and see what they are about. When he got down, 5 of them were sitting, screaming and lamenting quite piteously, each outdoing the other. "What misfortune has happened then?" he asked. "Ah, dear Hans," said Elise, "if we marry each other and have a child, and he is big, we perhaps should send him something to drink. And then the pickaxe, which has been left up there, might dash his brains out." It actually literally says, word for word, "dash his brains out," if it were to fall down. So that we not reason to weep? "Come," said Hans, "more understanding than that is needed for my household. As thou art such a clever Elise, I will have thee." What? "Come," said Hans, "more understanding than that is not needed for mine household, as thou art such a clever Elise. I will have thee." And he seized her hand and took her upstairs with him and married her. And Hans had her some time. He said, "Wife, I am going out to work and earn some money for us. Go into the field and cut the corn, that we may have some bread." "Yes, dear Hans, I will do that." After Hans had gone away, she cooked himself some good broth, and took it into the field. When she came to the field, she said to herself, "What shall I do? What shall I first? Or shall I eat first? Oh, I will eat first." Then she'd emptied her basin of broth, and when she was fully satisfied, she once more said, "What shall I do? What shall I shear first? And shall I sleep first? I will sleep first." Then she lay down among the corn and fell asleep. Hans had been at home for a long time, but Elise did not come home. Then said he, "What a clever Elise I have. She is so industrious that she does not even come home to eat." What? As, however, she still stayed, and it was evening, Hans went out to see what she had cut, but nothing was cut, and she was lying among the corn asleep. Then Hans hastened home and brought a fowler's net with a little bells and hung it round about her, and she went on sleeping. Then he ran home and shut the house door, and sat down in his chair and worked. At length, when it was quite dark, clever Elise awoke, and when she got up there was jingling all around about her, and the bells rang at each step which she shook. Then she was alarmed and became uncertain whether she really was clever Elise or not, and said, "Is it I, or is it not I?" But she knew not what answer to make to this, and stood for a time in doubt. At length she thought, "I will go home and ask if it be I, or if it be not I. That will I sure to know." She ran to the door of her own house, but it was shut, and then she knocked at the window and cried, "Hans, is Elise within?" "Yes," answered Hans, "she is within." Hereupon she was terrified, and said, "Ah, heavens, then it is not I," and went to another door. And when the people heard the jingling of the bells, they would not open it, and she could not get in nowhere. Then she ran out of the village, and no one has seen her since. What? The 4 skillful brothers. There once was a poor man who had 4 sons. And when they were grown up, he said to them, "My dear children, you must now go out into the world, for I have nothing to give you. So set out, and go some distance to learn a trade, and see how you can make your way." So the 4 brothers took their sticks, bade their father farewell, and went through the town gate together. When they had traveled about for some time, they came to a crossroad which was branched off in 4 different directions. Then said the eldest, "Here we must separate it, but on this day, 4 years hence, we will meet again each other on this spot. In the meantime, we will seek our fortunes." Then each of them went his way. The eldest man, who had asked him where he was going and what he was intending to do, "I want to learn a trade," he replied. Then the other said, "Come with me and be a thief." "No," he answered, "that is not regarded as a reputable trade. And at the end of it, one has to sit on the gallows." "Oh," said the man, "you need not be afraid of the gallows. I will only teach you to get such things as no other man can lay hold of, and no one will ever detect you." So he allowed himself to be talked into it, and he became an accomplished thief, and so dexterous that nothing was safe from him once he desired to have it. The second brother met a man who put the same question to him about what he wanted to learn in the world. "I don't know yet," he replied. "Then come with me, and be an astronomer. There is nothing better than that, for nothing is hid from you." He liked the idea and became such a skillful astronomer that when he had learned everything and was about to travel onward, his master gave him a telescope and said to him, "With that thou canst see whatsoever takes place, either on earth or in heaven, and nothing can remain concealed from thee." A huntsman took the third brother into training, and gave him such excellent instruction in everything which related to huntsmanship that he became an experienced hunter. When he went away, his master gave him a gun and said, "It will never fail you. Whatsoever you aim at, you are certain to hit." The youngest brother also met a man who spoke to him, and inquired what his intentions were. "Would you like to be a tailor?" said he. "No, not that I know of," said the youth, "sitting doubled over from morning till night, driving the needle and the goose backward and forward is not to my taste." "Oh, but you are speaking in ignorance," answered the man. "With me you would learn a very different kind of tailoring, which is respectable and proper, for the most part very honorable." So he let himself be persuaded, and went with the man and learned his art from the very beginning. When they parted, the man gave the youth a needle and said, "With this you can sew together whatever is given you, and whatever is soft as an egg or as hard as steel, and it will become one piece of stuff, so that no seam will be visible." When the appointed 4 years were over, the 4 brothers arrived at the same time at the crossroads, embraced and kissed each other, and returned home to their father. "So now," said he, quite delighted, "the wind has blown you back again to me." While they sat in front of the house under a large tree, they told him all that had happened, and how each of them learned his trade. "Now," the father said, "I will put you all to the test, and see what you can do." Then he looked up and said to his second son, "Between 2 branches, up at the top of this tree, there is a chaffinch's nest. Tell me how many eggs there are in it." The astronomer took out his glass, looked up, and said, "There are 5. Then the father said to the eldest, "Fetch the eggs down, without disturbing the bird, which is sitting therein." The skillful thief climbed up and took the 5 eggs from beneath the bird, which never observed what he was doing, and remained quietly sitting where he was, and brought them down to his father. The father took them and put one of them on each corner of the table, and the 5th in the middle, and said to the huntsman, "Which one shalt thou shoot all 5 eggs in 2 through the middle? With one shot thou shalt shoot all 5 eggs down through the middle." The huntsman aimed and shot the eggs, and all 5 as the father desired, and that at one shot. "Now it's your turn," said the father to the 4th son. "You shall sew the eggs together again, and the young birds that are inside them as well, so that they are not hurt by the shot." The tailor brought his needle and sewed them as his father wished. When he had done this, the thief had to climb up the tree again and carry them to the nest, and put them back again without the bird being aware of it. The bird sat, and after a few days the young ones crept out, and they had a red line around their necks where they had been sewn together by the tailor. "Well," said the old man to his sons, "I begin to think you are worth more than green clover." Why are all the people in these stories terrible people? "You have used your time well and learned something good. I can't say which of you deserves the most praise. That will be proved if you have but an early opportunity of using your talents." Not long after this, there was a great uproar in the country when the king's daughter was carried off by a dragon. The king was full of trouble about it, both day and night, and he proclaimed that whosoever brought her back should have her as his wife. The four brothers, to themselves, this would be a fine opportunity for us to show what we can do, and that resolved to go forth and liberate the king's daughter. I will soon know where she is, said the astronomer, and he looked through his telescope and said, I see her already. She is far away from here on the rock of the sea, and the dragon is beside her watching. Then he went to the king and asked for a ship for himself and his brothers, and sailed with them over to the sea, until they came to the rock. There the king's daughter was sitting, and the dragon was lying asleep in her lap. A huntsman said, I dare not fire. I should kill the beautiful maiden at the same time. Then we'll try my art, said the thief. And he crept thither, and stole her away from under the dragon. So quietly and dexterously, the monster never remarked it, but went on snoring. Full of joy, they hurried off with her aboard the ship, and steered out into the open sea. But when the dragon awoke and found the princess gone, he followed them, and came snorting angrily through the air. And just as he was circling above the ship, and about to descend, the huntsman shouldered his gun, shot the monster to the heart, and he fell down dead, but was so large and powerful that his fall shattered the whole ship. Although they laid hold of several planks to float upon the wide sea, they were in great peril. But the tailor was not idle. He took his wondrous needle, and with a few stitches sewed the planks together, and after that they had seated themselves upon them, and collected all the fragments of the vessel. And he sewed these skillfully together, so that in a very short time the ship was once more seaworthy, and they could go home again in safety. When the king once more saw his daughter, they were great rejoicing. He said to the four brothers, One of you shall have her for wife. But which one of you it is to be you must settle among yourselves. Then a contest began among them, for each preferred his own claim. The astronomer said, If I had not seen the princess, all your acts would have been useless, so she is mine. The thief said, What would have been the use of your seeing if I had not gotten her away from the dragon? So she is mine. The huntsman said, The princess and all of you would be torn to pieces with the dragon, not my shot had hit him. So she is mine. The tailor said, And if I, by my art, had not sewn the ship together, you would not have been miserably drowned, so she is mine. Then the king uttered this, saying, Each of you has an equal right, and all of you cannot have the maiden. And as all of you cannot have the maiden, none of you shall have her. But I will give to each of you a reward, a portion of my kingdom. The brothers were pleased with this decision, and said, It is better thus than we should be at variance with each other. Then each of them received his portion, and they lived with their father in the greatest happiness, as long as it pleased God. Clever Grethel. There once was a cook named Grethel, who wore shoes with red rosettes, and when she walked out with them, she turned herself this way and that, and thought, You certainly are a pretty girl. And when she came home, and she drank, in her gladness of heart, a draught of wine. And as wine excites a desire to eat, she tasted the best of whatever she was cooking, until she was satisfied, and said, The cook must know what the food is like. It came to pass that the master one day said to her, Grethel, There is a guest coming in the evening. Prepare 2 fowls very daintily. I will see to it, master, answered Grethel. She killed 2 fowls, scalded them, plucked them, and put them on the spit. And towards evening set them before the fire, that they might roast. The fowls began to turn brown, and they were nearly ready, but the guest had not yet arrived. Then Grethel called out to her master, If the guest does not come, I must take the fowls away from the fire, but it will be a sin and a shame if they are not eaten directly when they are the juiciest. The master said, I will run myself and fetch the guest. When the master had turned his back, Grethel laid the spit with the fowls on one side, and thought, Standing so long by the fire makes one hot and thirsty. Who knows when they'll come? Meanwhile, I will run into the cellar and take a drink. And she ran down and set a jug. God bless it to my use, Grethel, and took a good drink, and took yet another heavy draught. Then she went and put the fowls down again by the fire, basted them, and drove the spit merrily round. But the roast meat smelt so good, Grethel thought, something might be wrong if it ought to be tasted. She touched it with her finger, and said, Ah, how good the fowls are! It certainly is a sin and a shame that they are not eaten directly. She ran to the windows to see if the master was coming to his guest, but she saw no one, and went back to the fowls and thought, One of the wings is burning. I had better take it off and eat it. So she cut it off and ate it, and enjoyed it, and when she had done, she thought the other wing must go too, or else master will observe that something is missing. When the 2 wings were eaten, she went and looked for her master and did not see him. And then she thought, who knows, perhaps they are not coming at all, and have turned in somewhere else. Then she said, hello, Gethel. Enjoy yourself. 1 fowl has been cut in 2. Take another drink and eat it up entirely. When it is eaten, you will have some peace. Why should God's good gifts be spoiled? So she ran in the cellar again, took an enormous drink, and ate up the 1 chicken in great glee. When one of the chickens was swallowed down, and still her master did not come, Grethel looked at the other, and said, where one is, the other should be likewise. The 2 go together. What's right for one is right for the other. I think if I were to take another draught, it would do me no harm. So she took another heavy draught, and let the 2nd chicken join the first. And when she was just in the best of the eating, her master came and cried, haste thee, Grethel, the guest is coming directly after me. Yes, sir, I will soon serve up, answered Grethel. Meantime the master looked to see that the table was properly laid, and took the great knife, wherewith he was going to carve the chickens, and sharpened it on the steps. Presently the guest came and knocked politely courteously at the house door. Grethel ran and looked to see who was there, and when she saw the guest, she put her finger to her lips and said, hush, hush, get away as quickly as you can. If my master catches you, it will be the worse for you. He certainly did ask you to supper, but his intention is to cut off... He certainly did ask you to supper, but his intention is to cut off your 2 ears. Just listen, how he's sharpening the knife for it. The guest heard the sharpening and hurried down the steps again as fast as he could. Grethel was not idle. She ran screaming to her master and cried, you have invited a fine guest. Why, Grethel, what do you mean by that? Yes, said she, he has taken the chickens which I was just going to serve up off the dish, and has run away with them. That's a nice trick, said her master, and lamented the fine chickens. If he had but left me one, so that something remained for me to eat. He called to him to stop, but the guest pretended not to hear. Then he ran after him with the knife still in hand, crying, just one! Just one! Meaning that the guest should leave him just 1 chicken, and not take both. But the guest, however, thought no otherwise than that he was going to give up 1 of his ears, and ran as if fire were burning under him, and in order to take them both home with him. The Bremen town musicians. A certain man had a donkey, which had carried the corn sacks to the mill indefatigably for many long years. But his strength was going, and he was growing more and more unfit for work. Then his master began to consider how he might best save his keep. But the donkey, seeing that no good wind was blowing, ran away and set out on the road to Bremen. There, he thought, I can surely be town musician. When he had walked some distance, he found a hound lying on the road, gasping like one who had run till he was tired. What are you gasping for, you big fellow? Asked the donkey. Ah, replied the hound, as I am old and daily grow weaker. No longer can hunt. My master wanted to kill me. So I took flight, but now how am I to earn my bread? I'll tell you what, said the donkey. I am going to Bremen, and shall be town musician there. Go with me, and engage yourself also as a musician. I will play the lute, and you shall play the kettle drum. The hound agreed, and on they went. Before long they came to a cat, sitting on the path with a face like 3 rainy days. Now then, old shaver, what has gone askew with you? Asked the donkey. Who can be merry when his neck is in danger? Answered the cat. Because I am getting old, and my teeth are worn to the stumps, and I prefer to sit by the fire and spin, rather than hunt after mice. My mistress wanted to drown me, so I ran away. But now good advice is scarce. Where am I to go? Go with us to Bremen. You understand night music. You can be a town musician. The cat thought well of it, and went with them. After this, the 3 fugitives came to a farmyard, and the cock was sitting upon the gate, and crowing with all his might. Your crow goes through and one through one, said the donkey. What is the matter? I have been foretelling the fine weather, because it is the day on which Our Lady washes Christ child's little shirts, and wants to dry them, said the cock. But the guests are coming for Sunday, so the housewife has no pity, and has told the cock she intends to put me in the soup tomorrow. This evening I am to have my head cut off, and I am the crowning at full pitch while I can. Ah, but Red Comb, said the donkey, you had better come away with us. We are going to Bremen. You can find better than death everywhere. You have a good voice. and if we make music together, it must have some quality." The cock agreed to this plan, and all four went on together. They could not, however, reach the city of Bremen one day. In the evening they came to a forest, where they meant to pass the night. The donkey and the hound laid themselves down under a large tree. The cat and the cock settled themselves in the branches, but the cock flew right to the top, where he was most safe. Before he went to sleep, he looked round about all four sides, and thought he saw in the distance a little spark burning. So he called out to his companions that there might be a house not far off, for he saw a light. And the donkey said, "If so, we had better get up and go on, for the shelter here is bad." The hound thought that a few bones with some meat on would do him good. So they went their way to the place where the light was, and found it to be a well-lit robber's house. The donkey, as big as, went to the window and looked in. "What do you see, my grey horse?" asked the cock. "What do I see?" answered the donkey. "A table covered with good things to eat and drink, and robbers sitting at it enjoying themselves." "That would be the sort of thing for us," said the cock. Yes, how we wish we were there," said the donkey. Then the animals took counsel together how they should manage to drive away the robbers, and at last they thought of a plan. The donkey was to place himself with his feet, 4 feet, up on the window ledge, and the hound was to jump on the donkey's back, and the cat was to climb on top of the dog, and lastly the cock was to fly up and perch on the head of the cat. And when this was done, at a given signal, they began to perform their music together. And the donkey brayed, and the hound barked, and the cat mewed, and the cock crowed. Then they burst through the window into the room, and the glass clattered. At this horrible din, the robbers sprang up, thinking no otherwise than a ghost had come in, and fled in great fright out into the forest. The 4 companions now sat down at the table, well content what was left, and as they are well going to fast for a month. As soon as the 4 minstrels had done, they put out the light, and each sought for himself a sleeping place according to his nature and to what suited him. The donkey laid himself down upon some straw in the yard, the hound behind the door, the cat upon the hearth near the warm ashes, and the cock perched himself upon a beam on the roof. And being tired from their long walk, they soon went to sleep. When it was past midnight, and the robbers saw from far off the light was no longer burning in the house, and all appeared quiet, the captain said we ought not to have let ourselves be frightened out of our wits, and he ordered one of them to go and examine the house. The messenger, finding all still, went to the kitchen to light a candle, and taking glistening fiery eyes of the cat for live coals, he held a lucifer match to them to light them. But the cat did not understand the joke, and flew in his face, spitting and scratching. And he was dreadfully frightened, and ran back to the back door. But the dog who lay there sprang up and bit his leg, and as he ran across the yard by the straw heap, the donkey gave him a smart kick with his hind foot. The cock, too, who had been awakened by the noise, had become lively and cried down from the beam, "Cock-a-doodle-doo." Then the robber ran back as fast as he could to his captain, and said, "Ah, there is a horrible witch sitting in the house, who spat on me and scratched my face with long claws. And by the door stands a man with a knife, who stabbed me in the leg. And in the yard there lies a black monster who beat me with a wooden club. And above the roof sits the judge, who called out, 'Bring the rogue here to me.' So I got away as fast as I could." After this, the robbers did not trust themselves in the house again, but it suited the 4 musicians of Bremen so well that they did not care to leave it any more. The water of life. There was once a king who had an illness, and no one believed that he would come out of it with his life. He had 3 sons, who were much distressed about it, and went down into the palace garden and wept. There they met an old man who inquired of the cause of their grief. They told him that their father was so ill that he would most certainly die, for nothing seemed to cure him. Then the old man said, "I know of one more remedy. That is the water of life. If he drinks of it, he will become well again, but it is hard to find." The eldest said, "I will manage to find it," and went to the sick king, and begged to be allowed to go forth in search of the water of life. "For that alone could save him." "No," said the king. "The danger is too great. I would rather die." But he begged so long that the king consented. The prince thought in his heart, "If I bring the water, then I shall be best beloved by my father, and shall inherit the kingdom." And so he set out, and when he had ridden forth a little distance, a dwarf stood there in the road and called him and said, "Whither away so fast?" "Silly shrimp," said the prince, very haughtily, "it has nothing to do with you. and rode on. But the little dwarf grew angry, and he wished an evil wish. And soon after the prince entered a ravine, and the further he rode, the closer the mountains drew together. And at last the road became so narrow that he could not advance a step further. It was impossible either to turn his horse or to dismount from the saddle. And he was shut in there as if it were a prison. The sick king waited long for him, but he came not. Then the second son said, "Father, let me go forth to seek the water," and thought to himself, "If my brother is dead, then the kingdom will fall to me." At first, the king would not allow him to go there, but at last yielded. So the prince set out on the same road his brother had taken. He too met the dwarf, who stopped him to ask whether he was going in such haste. "Little shrimp," said the prince, "that is nothing to thee," and rode on without giving him another look. But the dwarf bewitched him, and he, like the other, rode into a ravine and could go no further forwards or back. So fare haughty people. So the second son also remained away, and the youngest begged to be allowed to go forth to fetch water. At last the king was obliged to let him go. When he met the dwarf, and the latter asked him where he was going in such haste, he stopped and gave him an explanation, and said, "I am seeking the water of life, for my father is sick unto death." "Dost thou know, then, where it is to be found?" "No," said the prince. "As thou hast borne thyself as it is seemly, and not haughtily like thy false brothers, I will give thee information, and tell thee how thou mayest attain the water of life. It springs from a fountain in the courtyard of an enchanted castle, but thou wilt not be able to make thy way to it if I do not give thee an iron wand and 2 small loaves of bread. Strike thrice with the wand on the iron door in the castle, and it will spring open inside. Lie 2 lions with gaping jaws, but if thou throwest a loaf to each of them, they will be quieted. Then hasten to fetch some of the water of life before the clock strikes 12. Else the door will shut again, and thou wilt be in prison." The prince thanked him, took the wand and the bread, and set out on his way. When he arrived, everything was as the dwarf had said. The door sprang open at the third stroke of the wand, and when he had appeased the lions of bread, he entered the castle and came to a large, splendid hall, wherein sat some enchanted princes, whose rings he drew off their fingers. A sword and a loaf of bread were laying there, which he carried away. After this he entered a chamber in which a beautiful maiden, who rejoiced when she saw him, she kissed him, and told him that he had delivered her, and she should have the whole of her kingdom, and that if he would return in a year, their wedding would be celebrated. Likewise, she told him where the spring of water of life was, and that he had to hasten to draw some of it before the clock struck 12. Then he went onward, at last entered a room where there was a beautiful newly made bed, and as he was very weary, he felt inclined to rest a little. So he lay down and fell asleep. When he awoke, it was striking 11:45. He sprang up in fright and ran to the spring, drew some water in a cup, and stood near, and hastened away. But just as he was passing through the iron door, the clock struck 12, and the door fell to it with such violence that it carried away a piece of his heel. He, however, rejoicing at having obtained the water, went home afterwards, and again passed the dwarf. And the loaf, and he said, "With these thou hast won great wealth. With the sword thou canst slay whole armies, and the bread will never come to an end." But the prince would not go home to his father without his brothers, and said, "Dear dwarf, canst thou not tell me where my 2 brothers are? They went out before I did in such water life, and have not returned." "They are in prison between 2 mountains," said the dwarf. "I have condemned them to stay there, because they were so haughty." Then the prince begged until the dwarf released them. But he warned him, however, and said, "Beware of them, for they have bad hearts." When his brothers came, he rejoiced. He told them how things had gone with him, and he had found the water of life and brought a cupful away with him, and that he had rescued a beautiful princess, who was willing to wait a year for him, and that their wedding was to be celebrated and would obtain a great kingdom. After that they rode on together, and chanced upon a land of war and famine reigned, and whose ruler was that he must perish for the scarcity of food. Then the prince went to him and gave him the loaf, wherewith he fed and satisfied the whole of his kingdom. And the prince also gave him the sword, wherewith he slew the host of the enemies, who can now live and rest in peace. The prince then took back his loaf and sword, and the 3 brothers rode on. But after this they entered 2 more countries, where war and famine reigned, and each time the prince gave his loaf and the sword to the rulers to deliver their kingdoms. After that they went on board a ship and sailed over the sea. During the passage the 2 eldest conversed apart and said, "The youngest has found the water of life, not we, and for that our father will give him the kingdom, which belongs to us, and he will rob us of our fortune." Then they began to seek revenge, and plotted with each other to destroy him. They waited until they found him fast asleep, and they poured the water of life out of the cup and took it for themselves. But into the cup they poured salt sea water. Now therefore, when they arrived, the youngest took his cup to the sick king, in order that he might drink out of it and be cured. But scarcely had he drunk it, a very little salt sea water, they became still worse than before. And as he was lamenting over this, the two eldest brothers came and accused the youngest of having intended to poison him, and said that they had brought him the true water of life, and handed it to him. And he had scarcely tasted when he felt his sickness departed, and became strong and healthy as days of use. After that they both mocked the youngest, saying, "You certainly found the water of life, but you have had the pain, and we the gain. You should have been sharper, and should have kept your eyes open. We took it from you while you were asleep at sea, and when a year is over, one of us will go and fetch the beautiful princess. But beware that you do not disclose aught of this to our father. Indeed, he does not trust you, and if you say a single word, you shall lose your life in the bargain. But if you keep silent, you shall have it as a gift." The old king was angry of his youngest son, and thought he had plotted against his life. So he summoned the court together, and had sentence pronounced upon him, that he should be secretly shot. And once, when the prince was riding forth to the chase, suspecting no evil, the king's huntsman rode with him. And when they were quite alone in the forest, the huntsman looked so sorrowful, the prince said to him, "Dear huntsman, what ails you? I cannot tell you, and yet I ought." The prince said, "Say openly what it is, I will pardon you." "Alas," said the husband, "I am to shoot you dead. The king has ordered me to do it." Then the prince was shocked and said, "Dear huntsman, let me live. There, I give you my royal garments. Give me your common ones instead." The huntsman said, "I will willingly do that, indeed. I should not have been able to shoot you." Then they exchanged clothes, and the huntsman returned home. The prince, however, went further into the forest. After a time, 3 wagons of gold, precious stones, came to the king for his youngest son, which were sent by the 3 kings who had slain their enemies with the prince's sword, and fed their people with his bread, and who wished to show their gratitude for it. The old king then thought, "Can my son have been innocent?" and said to his people, "Would that he were still alive! How it grieves me that I have suffered him to be killed." "He still lives," said the husband. "I could not find in my heart to carry out your command," and told the king how it happened. Then a stone fell from the king's heart, and he had it proclaimed in every country that his son might return and be taken into favor again. The princess, however, had a road made up to her palace, which was quite bright and golden, and told her people that whosoever came riding straight along to her would be the right wooer, and was to admit it, and whosoever rode by the side of it was not the right one, and was not to be admitted. As the time now came, and close at hand, the eldest thought he would hasten to the king's daughter, and give himself out as her deliverer, and thus win her for his bride, and the kingdom to boot. Therefore he rode forth, and when he arrived in front of the palace, saw the splendid golden road, and thought, "It would be a sin and a shame if I would ride over that," and turned aside, and rode on the right side of it. But when he came to the door, the servants told him that he was not the right man to go away again. Soon after this, the second prince set out, and when he came to the golden road, and his horse had put one foot on, he thought it would be a sin and a shame to tread a piece of it off. And he turned aside and rode on the left side of it. And when he reached the door, the attendants told him he was not the right one, and he was to go away. When last year When at last the year had entirely expired, the third son likewise wished to ride out on the forest to his beloved, and with her forgot his sorrows. So he set out and thought of her incessantly, and wished to be with her so much that he never even noticed the golden road at all. So his horse rode onward up on the middle of it, and when he came to the door, it was opened. The princess received him with joy, and said he was her deliverer. And the lord of the kingdom, and their wedding, was celebrated with great rejoicing. When it was over, she told him that his father invited him to come home, and had forgiven him. So he rode thither, and told him everything, how his brothers had betrayed him, and how he had nevertheless kept silent. And the old king wished to punish them, but they had put to sea, and never came back as long as they lived. Sleeping Beauty. A long time ago there was a king and a queen, who said every day, "Ah, if only we had a child," but they never had one. But it happened that once when the queen was bathing, a frog crept out through the water onto the land, and said to her, "Your wish shall be fulfilled. Before years gone by, you shall have a daughter." What the frog had said came true, and the queen had a little girl, who was so pretty that the king could not contain himself for joy, and ordered a great feast. He invited not only his kindred, friends, and acquaintances, but also the wise women, in order that they might be kind and well disposed toward the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but as he had only 12 golden plates for them to eat out of, one of them had to be left at home. The feast was held with all manner of splendor, and when it came to an end, the wise women bestowed their magic gifts upon the baby, one virtue, another beauty, a third riches, and so on with everything in the world that one can wish for. When 11 of them had made their promises, suddenly the 13th had come in. She wished to avenge herself for not having been invited, and without greeting or even looking at anyone, she cried with a loud voice, "The king's daughter shall in her 15th year prick her finger with a spindle and fall down dead." And without saying a word, she turned round and left the room. They were all shocked, but the 12th, whose good wish still remained unspoken, came forward and said, as she could not undo the evil sentence, but only soften it, said, "It shall not be death, but a deep sleep of 100 years, into which the princess shall fall." The king, who would fain keep his dear child from misfortune, gave orders that every spindle in the whole kingdom should be burnt. Meanwhile, the gifts of the wise women were plenteously fulfilled on the young girl, for she was so beautiful, modest, good-natured, and wise, that everyone who saw her was bound to love her. It happened on the very day that she was 15 years old. The king and queen were not home, and the maiden was left in the palace quite alone. So she went round into all sorts of places, and looked in the rooms and bedchambers just as she liked, and at last came to an old tower. She climbed up the narrow winding staircase, and reached the little door. A rusty key was in the lock, and when she turned it, the door sprang open. And there in a little room sat an old woman with a spindle, busily spinning flax. "Good day, old dame," said the king's daughter. "What are you doing there?" "I am spinning," said the old woman, and nodded her head. "What sort of thing is that rattles round so merrily?" said the girl, and she took the spindle and wanted to spin too. But scarcely had she touched the spindle when the magic decree was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger with it. And in the very moment she felt the prick, she fell down upon the bed that stood there, and lay in a deep sleep. And this sleep extended over the whole palace. The king and queen, who had just come home, entered the great hall and began to go to sleep, and the whole of the court with them. And the horses, too, went to sleep in the stable, and the dogs in the yard, and the pigeons upon the roof, and the flies in the wall. Even the fire that was flaming on the hearth became quiet. This kind of makes me think of Dragon Quest VIII. Slept the roast meat left on frizzling, and the cook, who was just going to pull the hair of the scullery because he had forgotten. It's like a time stop spell. So he had forgotten something, left him and went to sleep. Imagine if that was a movie, like time got frozen, and then they woke up in this modern era. Right, there's computers and planes now. The wind fell, and on the trees before the castle not a leaf moved again. But round about the castle there began to grow a hedge of thorns. This really is Dragon Quest VIII, which every year became higher and at least grew up around the castle and all over it. So there was nothing left to be seen, not even the flag upon the roof. But the story of the beautiful sleeping Briar Rose, so the princess was named, went about the country, so that the time the king's sons came and tried to get through the horny hedge in the castle, but they found it impossible, for the thorns held fast together as though they had hands, and the youths were caught in them, could not get loose again, and died a miserable death. After a long years, the king's son came again to the country, and heard an old man talking about the thorn hedge, and the castle was said to stand behind it, in which a wonderfully beautiful princess named Briar Rose had been asleep for 100 years, and the king and queen of the whole court were asleep likewise. He had heard, too, from his grandfather that many kings' sons had already come and tried to get through the thorny hedge, but they had remained stuck fast, and had died a pitiful death. Then the youth said, "I am not afraid. I will go and see the beautiful Briar Rose." The good old man tried to dissuade him best he could, but the youth would not listen to his words. By the time the 100 years was past, the day had come when Briar Rose was come to work again. When the king's son came near to the thorny hedge, it bloomed large and beautiful flowers, which parted from each other of their own accord, and let him pass unhurt, before closing again behind him like a hedge. In the castle yard he saw horses and spotted hounds lying asleep. So Dalmatians? That must be Dalmatians. And on the roof sat pigeons with their heads under their wings. And when he entered the house, the flies were asleep upon the wall. The cook in the kitchen was still holding out his hand to seize the boy, and the maid was sitting by the black hen which he was going to pluck. He went on further, and in the great hall he saw the whole of the court lying asleep, and up on the throne there lay the king and the queen. And then he went on still further, and so quiet breath could be heard, and at last he came to the tower, and the door a little room, where Briar Rose was sleeping. There she lay, so beautiful that he could not turn his eyes away, and he stooped down and gave her a kiss. But as soon as he kissed her, Briar Rose opened her eyes and woke, and looked at him quite sweetly. Then they went down together, and the king awoke and the queen, and the whole court looked at each other in great astonishment. And the horses in the courtyard stood up and shook themselves. The hounds jumped up and wagged their tails. The pigeons upon the roof pulled out their heads from under their wings, looked around and flew into the open country. The flies in the wall crept again, and the fire in the kitchen burned up and flickered and cooked the meat. The joint began to turn and fizzle again, and the cook gave the boy such a box on the ear that he screamed, and the maid plucked the fowl ready for the spit. Then the marriage of the king's son with Briar Rose was celebrated. With all splendor they lived contented to the end of their days. Dr. Know-all. There once was a time a poor peasant named Crab, who drove with 2 oxen a load of wood to town, and sold it to a doctor for 2 thalers. When the money was being counted out to him, it so happened that the doctor was sitting at a table. And when the peasant saw how daintily he ate and drank, his heart desired what he saw, and he would willingly been a doctor too. So he remained standing a while, and at length inquired if he too could not be a doctor. "Oh yes," said the doctor, "that is soon managed. What must I do?" asked the peasant. "In first place, buy thee an ABC book, of the kind which has a cock on the frontispiece, and in the second, turn thy cart and thy 2 oxen into money, and get thyself some clothes, and whatsoever else pertains to medicine. Thirdly, have a sign painted for thyself with the words, 'I am Dr. Know-all,' and have that nailed up above thy house door too." The peasant did everything that he had been able to do. And when he had doctored people a while, but not long, a rich and great lord had some money stolen. Then he was told about Dr. Know-all, who lived in such and such a village, and must know what had become of his money. So Lord had horses put in carriages and drove out to the village, and asked Crab if he were the Dr. Know-all. "Yes, he was," he said. Then he was to go with him and bring back the stolen money. "Oh yes, but grief, my wife must go too." The Lord was willing to let both of them have a seat in the carriage, and they all drove away together. When they came to the nobleman's castle, the table was spread, and the Crab was told to sit down to eat. "Yes, my wife Grief too," said he, and he seated with her at the table. And when the first servant came with a dish of delicate fare, the peasant nudged his wife and said, "Grief, that was the first," meaning that was the servant that brought the first dish. The servant, however, thought he intended by that to say, "That is the first thief," and as he actually was so, he was terrified, and said to his comrade outside, "The doctor knows all. We shall fare ill," he said. "I was the first." The second did not want to go in after all, but was forced. But when he went in with his dish, the peasant nudged his wife and said, "Gent, Grief, that is the second." The servant was just as much alarmed as he got out. The third did not fare better, for the peasant again said, "Grief, that is the third." The fourth had to carry the dish that was so covered, and the Lord told the doctor that he was to show his skill. And guess what was beneath the cover. The doctor looked at the dish and had no idea what to say, and cried, "Ah, poor Crab." When the Lord heard that, he cried, "There, he knows it! He knows who has the money." On this the servants looked terribly uneasy, and made a sign to the doctor that they wished him to step outside for a moment. When therefore he went out, all 4 of them confessed him they had stolen the money, and said they would willingly restore it, and give him a heavy sum into the bargain, if he would not denounce them. For if he did, they would be hanged. They led him to the spot where the money was concealed. With this the doctor was satisfied, and returned to the hall, sat down at the table, and said, "My lord, now will I search in my book where the gold is hidden." The 5th servant, however, crept into the stove to hear if the doctor still knew. The doctor still sat still and opened his ABC book, and turned his pages backward and forward, and looked for the cock. As he could not find it immediately, he said, "I know you are there, so you had better show yourself." Then the fellow in the stove thought the doctor meant him, and full of terror sprang out and said, "That man knows everything." Then Dr. Know-all showed the count where the money was, but did not say who had stolen it, and received from both sides much money in reward, and became a renowned man. The Goose Girl. There was once upon a time an old queen, whose husband had been dead for many years, and she had a beautiful daughter. When the princess grew up, she was betrothed to a prince who lived at a great distance. When the time came for her to be married, and she had to journey forth into the distant kingdom, the aged queen packed up for her many costly vessels of silver and gold, and trinkets also of gold and silver, and cups and jewels, in short, everything which appeared to be royal dowry, for she loved her child with all her heart. She likewise sent her maid in waiting, and who was to ride with her, and hand her over to the bridegroom. And each had a horse for the journey, but the horse of the king's daughter was called Falada, and could speak. So when the hour of parting had come, the aged mother went into her bedroom, took a small knife, and cut her finger with it until it bled. Then she held a white handkerchief to it, which she let drop 3 drops of blood, and gave it to her daughter and said, "Dear child, preserve this carefully. It will be of service to you on your way." So they took a sorrowful leave of each other. The princess put the piece of cloth in her bosom, and mounted her horse, and then went away to the bridegroom. After that, she had ridden for a while, felt a burning thirst, and said to her waiting maid, "Dismount, and take my cup, which thou hast brought with thee for me, and get me some water from the stream, for I should like to drink." "If you are thirsty," said the waiting maid, "get off your horse yourself, and lie down and drink out of the water. I don't choose to be your servant." So in her great thirst the princess alighted, bent down over the water in the stream, and drank, and was not allowed to drink out of the golden cup. Then she said, "Ah, heaven!" Then 3 drops of blood answered, "If thy mother knew, her heart would break." But the king's daughter was humble, and said nothing, and mounted her horse again. She rode some miles further, but the day was warm, and the sun scorched her, and she was thirsty once more. And when they came to a stream of water, she cried for her waiting, "Dismount, and give me some of my water and my golden cup," for she had long forgotten the girl's ill wills. But the waiting maid, still more haughtily, "If you wish to drink, drink as you can. I don't choose to be your maid." Then in her great thirst the king's daughter alighted, bent over the flowing stream, and wept, and said, "Ah, heaven!" And the drops of blood again replied, "If thy mother knew this, her heart would break." And as she was thus drinking, and leaning right over the stream, the handkerchief of the 3 drops of blood fell out of her bosom, and floated away with the water without her observing it, so great was her trouble. The waiting maid, however, had seen it, and she rejoiced to think that she had now power over the bride, for since the princess had lost the drops of blood, she had become weak and powerless. So now when she was wanted to mount her horse again, the one that was called Falada, the waiting maid said, "Falada is more suitable for me, and my nag will do for thee." And the princess had to be content with that. Then the waiting maid, with many hard words, bade the princess exchange her royal apparel for her own shabby clothes, and at length she was compelled to swear by the clear sky above that she would not say a word of this to anyone at the royal court, and if she had not taken this oath, she would have been killed on the spot. But Falada saw all this, and observed it well. The waiting maid would now mounted Falada, and the true bride the bad horse, and thus they travelled onwards until at length they reached the royal palace, and there was rejoicing over her arrival, and the prince sprang forward to meet her, and lifted the waiting maid from her horse, and thought she was his consort. She was conducted upstairs, with the real princess left standing below. Then the old king looked out the window and saw her standing in the courtyard, and how daintily and delicate and beautiful she was, and instantly went to the royal apartment and asked the bride about the girl that she was with, and standing below in the courtyard, who she was. "I picked her up on the way of the companion. Give the girl something to work at, that she may not stand idle." But the old king had no work for her, and knew of none, so she said, "I have a little boy who tends these geese. She may help him." The boy was called Conrad, and the true bride had to help him tend to these geese. Soon afterward, the false bride said to the young king, "Dearest husband, I beg you to do me a favor," he answered. "I will do so most willingly." "Then send for the knacker, and have the head of the horse on which I rode here cut off, for it vexed me on the way." In reality, she was afraid the horse might tell how she had behaved to the king's daughter. Then she succeeded in making the king's promise that it should be done, and the faithful Falada was to die. This came to the ears of the real princess, and she secretly promised to pay the knacker a price of gold if he would perform a small service for her. There was a great dark-looking gateway in the town, through which morning and evening she had to pass with the geese. would be so good as to nail up Falada's head on it, so that she might see him again, more than once. The knacker's man promised to do that, and cut off the head and nailed it fast beneath the gateway. Early in the morning, when she and Conrad drove out of their flock beneath the gateway, said, "Ah, alas, Falada is hanging there." Then they answered, "Alas, young queen, how ill you fare. If this your tender mother knew, her heart would surely break in two." Then they went still further on, out of the town, and drove their geese into the country. And when they had come to a meadow, she sat down and unbound her hair, which was like pure gold. And Conrad saw it and delighted in its brightness, and wanted to pluck out a few hairs. Then she said, "Blow, blow, thou gentle wind, I say, blow Conrad's little hat away, and make him chase it here and there, until I have braided all my hair, and bound it up again." And there came such a violent wind that blew Conrad's hat far away across the country, and he was forced to run after it. When he came back, she had finished combing her hair and was putting it up again, and he could not get any of it. Then Conrad was angry and would speak to her, and thus they watched the geese, and would not speak to her. And thus they watched the geese until evening, and they came home. Next day, when they were driving the geese out through the gateway, the maiden said, "Alas, Falada hanging there." Falada answered, "Alas, young queen, how ill you fare. If this your tender mother knew, her heart would surely break in two." And she sat down again in the field, and began to comb out her hair, and Conrad ran and tried to clutch it. And so she said in haste, "Blow, blow, thou gentle wind, I say, blow Conrad's little hat away, and make him chase it here and there, until I have braided all my hair, and bound it up again." Wow, that's the picture you guys have here in the backdrop. This makes me think of the art from like Final Fantasy video games. Like, the old school Final Fantasy art, like for the original Final Fantasies, for like decades ago. Then the wind blew and blew his hat far away, and Conrad was forced to run after it. When he came back, her hair had been put up in a long time, and he could not get none of it. And so looked after the geese too. But in the evening, after they had gone home, Conrad went to the old king and said, "I won't tend the geese with the girl any longer." "Why not?" inquired the aged king. "Oh, because she vexes me the whole day long." Then the aged king commanded him to relate what it was done, and what she did to him. And as Conrad said, "In the morning, we passed beneath the dark gateway with the flock. There is a sorry horse's head on the wall, and she says to it, 'Alas, Falada, hanging there.' And the head replies, 'Alas, young queen, how ill you fare. If your tender mother knew, her heart would surely break in two.'" And Conrad went on to relate what happened with the goose pasture, and how when he had to chase his hat. The aged king commanded him to drive his flock out again the next day, and as soon as morning came, he placed himself behind the dark gateway, and heard how the maiden spoke to the head of Falada. And then he too went into the country, and hid himself in the thicket of meadows. There he soon saw with his own eyes the goose girl and the goose boy bringing their flock, and how after a while she sat down and unplaited her hair, which shone with radiance. "Blow, blow, thou gentle wind, I say, blow Conrad's little hat away again, and make him chase it here and there, until I have braided all my hair, and bound it up again." Then came a blast of wind and carried off Conrad's hat, so that he had run far away, while the maiden quietly went on combing and plaiting her hair, all of which the king observed. Then, quite unseen, he went away, and when the goose girl came home in the evening, he called her outside, and asked why she did all these things. "I may not tell you the matter. I dare not lament my sorrows to any human being, for I have sworn not to do so by the heaven which is above me. If I had not done that, I shall have lost my life." He urged her, and left her no peace, but he could draw nothing from her. Then said he, "Thou wilt not tell me nothing, that tell thy sorrows to the iron stove there." And he went away. Then she crept to the iron stove, and began to weep and lament, and emptied her whole heart, and said, "Here I am, deserted by the whole world, and yet I am a king's daughter, and a false waiting maid has by force brought me to such a pass that I have been compelled to put off my royal apparel, and that she has taken my place with the bridegroom, and I have to perform menial service as a goose girl. If my mother did but know, her heart would break." The aged king, however, was standing outside by the pipe of the stove, and was listening to what she said, and heard it. Then he came back again, and bade her come out of the stove, and the royal garments were placed on her, and it was marvelous how beautiful she was. The aged king summoned his son, and revealed to him that he had gotten a false bride, who was only a waiting maid, but that the true one was standing there, as the sometime goose girl. The young king rejoiced with all his heart, when he saw her beauty and youth, and a great feast was made ready, to which all the people and good friends were invited. At the head of the table sat the bridegroom with the king's daughter at one side of him, and the waiting maid on the other. But the waiting maid was blinded, and did not recognize the princess in her dazzling array. When they had eaten and drunk, and were merry, the aged king asked the waiting maid, as a riddle, what a person deserved who had behaved in such a way to her master, and at the same time related the whole story, and asked what sentence such one merited. Then the false bride said, she deserved no better fate than to be stripped entirely naked, and put in a barrel, which is studded inside with pointed nails, and 2 white horses should be harnessed to it, which will drag her along through one street after another, till she is dead. It is thou, said the aged king, thou hast pronounced thine own sentence, and thus shall it be done unto thee. And when the sentence had been carried out, the young king married his true bride, and both of them reigned over the kingdom in peace and happiness. Feel free. Well, hope everyone had a wonderful day. Lunar D8 signing out.